or whatever it takes, by any means necessary. Failure is not an option kind of ground.
Right. But I think a lot of that, and I've heard her talk about the concept of essentially wanting something more than you fear it. And for women in particular, and women of color, Black women in all of these powerhouse industries where we're now really having a presence, fear seems to be the underlying thread that we always have to sort of work through. What if I'm not? What if they're right? What if I can't? Talk to me about how you have had to sort of pierce through fear and want it more than you were afraid of it. Was that moment when you realized I need to be out of here? Was that fearful for you?
By then I had made peace with it, but that's actually absolutely true. There's a little meme that a friend of mine posted recently, and it says, I can't bite my tongue because it hurts so much. I can't bite my tongue anymore because it hurts so much. That's not exactly the saying, but essentially, I cannot live with myself if I am compromising on this. And I would say, in addition to my corporate life at NBC and ABC, which is essentially 30 years of my life, but I've been gone from that for a decade and a half. I've essentially been a self-employed person writing books and serving on nonprofit boards and doing other things. And there's still moments when you realize that some of the things that you want are not happening in the way that you want them. And I would say that the most recent experience has been the Netflix series, Self-Made, based on my book, On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker. So I wrote that book. In fact, I began writing that book when I was deputy bureau chief at ABC.
Okay.
And the book came out in 2001. Really so glad I did that. It's a life's work to tell Madam C.J. Walker's story.
For the record, I'm glad you did it too. I thoroughly enjoyed.
Thank you. So that was important to me. And I continue to tell that story. And I had the Hollywood journey of how you get something produced. It started with Alex Haley was going to do a mini series and he was going to write a book that I had done the research for. Alex died before he was able to do that. But in the process, we had serious conversations about a mini series, and we'd met on his farm in Knoxville, Tennessee, and with a casting director and directors and historians, and really outlined what the process would be. So that was what my expectation about how a Hollywood production got made. But Alex died without it happening. Then when I finished the book, there was an option with Columbia TriStar and Sony, and that didn't happen. Then there was another one with HBO, and that didn't happen. Then we had this decade of nothing with Black characters will sell overseas, so the studios aren't really interested. And then April Reign and Oscar So White and the success of 12 Years a Slave and Selma and Ava DuVernay. So now Black folks are viable in Hollywood. And I started getting a lot of queries from people of studios about a Madam Walker production. And I ended up saying yes to one particular production company, and they brought on Octavia Spencer. I was really excited about that. And I thought I was going to have the same experience that I'd had with Alex, that I was going to be involved, that I should have been involved. But ultimately, when Warner Brothers and Netflix took over the project, the head writer that they assigned didn't want to hear from me. And so I had threatened by me, when I had an initial conversation with this person about her vision of the series. She wanted to focus on the conflict between Madam Walker and her competitor. And she wanted to exaggerate it in what I thought was a kind of a Real Housewives of Atlanta scenario and take it beyond what the reality was. And in an initial conversation, when I said, well, there was a rivalry, but I wouldn't make that the centerpiece of the storyline.
Right.
And apparently once I said that, then I was excluded from the conversation.
And
So
is there, let me, and I apologize for interrupting
no,
you there,
sure.
for these creatives who may be watching, I wonder, is there a lesson to be learned then about the conversations that have to be had about creative control when this is stemming from your original work? I mean, there's
Right.
no series to put together without the piece that you have spent decades working on.
Right.
Is there a lesson to be learned about creative control? And did anyone circle back to you at the end to say, here's the finished product, what do you think?
Well, and the way this worked, when I signed the contract, anybody who writes a book, I think when Stephen King did his very first contract, he didn't have creative control. Now he has creative control. At that point, the best that I could get was that I had script review. But again, I made an assumption based on my, dealings with the producer who optioned my book, that I would be very involved. But this head writer, along with Casey Lemons, who was the director and who was her friend, they decided that I was interfering with their creativity. And they really did not like my ideas, that I didn't understand Hollywood. I didn't understand what needed to be done. And they wanted to do the story in the way that they wanted to do it. So we went through this period of several months while the scripts were being written and I was being excluded from the conversation. I wrote 2 articles about it, a long article for The Undefeated and another piece for Variety where I described this journey. But ultimately, my contract said that they had to let me see the script. So finally, when the scripts were being finished, I was able to review them. And I read the script, the very first script. And I said, I am so disappointed. I sent really extensive notes. We had long Skype conversations where I said, I understand. I wanted to be blown away by the excellence of this. And instead, what I'm reading is Real Housewives of Atlanta. I wanted to see Madam Walker. Yes, she had conflicts. Yes, there are ways to have conflict, which is what you have to do in a Hollywood script. But what you have sent me is Real Housewives of Atlanta, where really in the initial script, Madam Walker and Annie Malone, it was now the character Annie Malone, who was her real life rival, but not in the way portrayed in the film. They were cursing at each other. They were calling each other the N word and the B word because the writer felt that it needed to be contemporary so people would relate to it. And I said, this is not what Black women in the early 20th century weren't doing that. They might have been doing shade, but
Right.
that wasn't happening. There's another way to portray that I think is sort of, more sophisticated and nuanced and interesting. So that happened. Then I saw the other scripts and I thought they were distorting it. I thought they were missing the point and that they missed the missed opportunity. So ultimately, Octavia Spencer was great. I loved having Octavia Spencer in the role. Blair Underwood was great, but I was ultimately, disappointed in the way that it unfolded. And I have, to your question, is there a lesson to be learned? One of the things the conversation that I'm trying to promote, because I am a journalist who has spent a lot of time with historians, Black women historians who have the material that Hollywood needs to tell these interesting stories. And I understand the dynamics of Hollywood enough to know that they have to make money. But I'm really trying to make sure that I'm somehow a conduit to bring together people who know these stories and who want to work with people in Hollywood so that we're not perpetuating the distortion. Hollywood has a really bad history of telling stories about Black people, starting with Birth of a Nation. And I think there are some Black producers and some Black creatives who really respect the history and who realize that I think have a responsibility to not distort Black people, to tell interesting stories, but not to perpetuate stereotypes. And there are other people who are really worried about the next gig.
Right. When ultimately it comes down to controlling the narrative is still so important, and trying to find the way to manage both is so critical.
Right.
Especially.
Yeah, I mean, I just think our stories are so interesting. There were things in the script, and I thought the real story is so much more compelling than the Real Housewives of Atlanta narrative that you have created. Why are you doing this?
Right.